I still have a problem opening doors. If somebody knocks on the door, I just like freeze. I can't handle it because I'm the one that opened the door that night. So. I still remember looking at Dougie and like when we heard the knock at 20 after 12, I looked at him and I was like, who the hell is knocking on the door at 20 after 12? And I looked at him and he nodded like, go ahead and open it. And that's when I didn't know if this was somebody playing a joke on us or something, the way the guy was dressed with the ski mask and the trench coat and the gloves. And I was like, if this isn't a joke, in a split second, I'm like, I don't know if this is a joke or not. And I looked over and there was a party next door, so everybody was looking at us out the window. I mean, they could see everything that was going on. And I tried to slam the door shut, and he put the gun barrel down in between the door and the door jamb and then flung me back against the wall. And I was stunned. And I mean, within seconds, he did the first shot that missed my brother, and then I saw a red mark on my brother's forehead, and then I saw his eye come out of his head, and he just fell forward, and yeah, it just happened that quick. And then I guess he shot him a few more times. I don't remember because I was just in shock. So.
Douglas Jeffrey Cleaves grew up in White House Station, New Jersey, a small town approximately 30 miles west of Newark and roughly halfway between Allentown, PA and New York City. There, he would grow up under the tutelage of his mother and two older brothers, and was a constant companion for his sister, Susan, who was little more than a year younger than him.
So when Dougie and I were young, we were very close. My parents got a divorce, I think, when I was in 7th grade, and it was very bitter. My father cheated on my mom quite a bit. My mom was absolutely beautiful. She looked like a movie star, and my father would cheat on her, and she would catch him, and then so finally she kicked him out and said, I'm not living like this anymore. And I guess so that Dougie and I weren't witness to some of the craziness, my mom would bring me to my grandparents all the time. And Dougie and I were like down there every weekend, all summer long. And my grandparents were really loving, really loving people. And they were a great influence on Dougie and I. They would teach us how to garden. You know what I mean? They were just wonderful, loving people. And my grandmother, Dougie, was one of her favorites. And so then we started getting older in our teenage years, and I was the bratty little sister. You know, he wanted to hang with me and all my girlfriends, and I didn't want him around me because I wanted to be with my girlfriends. I was a year younger than him, so we were close in age. He had his own set of friends. And, you know, I would be like, don't bother us. Like, I had a horse growing up, and I would let him ride my horse. And I would go with my girlfriends on the horse to the diner, and we would ride the horse to the diner, walk to the diner at night. And Dougie wanted to go with us because it was dark and we were young girls, and he wanted to protect us. And I was like, no, we'll be fine. You leave us alone. He was very protective. He wanted to make sure nobody got hurt. He was 6'4", so he was intimidating to look at, but he was as sweet as pie. So you know, we had our own set of friends growing up, and then he was in high school. He didn't want to be in high school anymore. He wanted to join the Army.
Doug was an avid outdoorsman who loved anything to do with nature. As you just heard from his sister, Susan, he was a big guy. As an adult, he stood approximately 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed approximately 250 pounds, which was perfect because Doug had ambitions of joining the Army. So as a teenager, Doug decided to drop out of high school to do just that.
So he decided he did not want to go to school anymore. My mom said, well, what are you going to do? And he said, I want to join the Army. He was really into it. He always did, the reenactment things. He loved that stuff. He just loved it. He was very into the military, very into doing the reenactments. He just loved it. If anybody should have been in the Army, it's my brother, because he loved it.
After enlisting, Doug was sent for basic training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Afterward, he would train to become both an artilleryman and a paratrooper, serving out a single 4-year enlistment before seeking an honorable discharge. However, Doug's time in the military would let him achieve another goal he'd been preparing for since childhood, a move to Alaska. During his time in the Army, Doug had sought out the chance to be stationed in Alaska, spending time in both Fairbanks and Anchorage. During that time, he had fallen in love with the state itself, which, as a current resident, I can't blame him. The state is beautiful. And after serving out his enlistment, Doug decided to remain there. His brother Richard would later recall to the Anchorage Daily Times. Doug was always what you would deem a rugged individual. He was just kind of naturally headed that way, and he went up there.
So, he went up to Alaska, and back then, to make a phone call, it was extremely expensive. So, our neighbor up the road, the husband worked for AT&T. I babysat her kids, and, she was friendly with us, and she would say to my mom, come up to my house because it's not going to cost anything on our phone for you to call Alaska. I guess because her husband worked for AT&T. So my mom would go up there and she would call Dougie. I think they spoke maybe once a month. He was paratrooping in the Army. Now, he said, I think he told my mom something about the Special Forces, but I called and I tried to find that, and I know Deb couldn't find anything on it, but I'm going to look through my box again because I thought I did find something on it. So I will see if I can find that. But he was a paratrooper. He loved it, absolutely loved it, loved being in the Army, loved being in planes. He loved it.
One thing about Doug's tenure in the Army that has never been cleared up is whether or not he was involved in the Special Forces. As you heard just a few seconds ago, his sister assumed that was the case based on something the family had heard from Doug, but it's unknown if that was true or not. Maybe it's possible that Doug intended to train for the Green Berets if he stayed in the military, but that never came to be. Regardless, after separating from the military, Doug did join the National Guard. He then began working a number of jobs in Alaska, including bouncing for a brief time at Swiftwater Bills, a local watering hole. Later, he would relocate up to Talkeetna, a small town a couple of hours north of Anchorage, which is known as a scenic touristy vacation spot. There, he worked for an air taxi company, which he seemed to really enjoy. Later, after moving back to Anchorage, he would begin to dabble in manual labor, things like construction and welding, but more on that later. During this time, it also became apparent that Doug was a pretty big fan of marijuana, with Alaska having decriminalized it in the years prior. In 1975, Alaska turned the possession of small amounts of weed into a misdemeanor, and then in 1982, fully decriminalized it to allow residents to have up to 4 ounces inside of their home or 1 ounce outside of it. Now, marijuana is completely legal in Alaska, even though it's not yet legal on a federal level. While this wouldn't play a large part in Doug's story, it would contribute to some theories later on. A little while after leaving the military, Doug struck up a relationship with a woman named Charlotte Palmer. The two started dating in 1982 and then surprised everyone by filing for a marriage license in January of 1983. At the time, the two were still living in Talkeetna. At least, that's where they applied for their marriage license. Just a handful of months later, on August 24th, 1983, the two would welcome their son into the world. Named Robert, this son would quickly become the primary focus of Doug's life, with family member Richard Cleaves later telling reporters with the Anchorage Daily Times, "Anytime I had correspondence with him, he spent 95% of the time talking about his son." Sadly though, the relationship with Charlotte Palmer would deteriorate rather quickly. Charlotte filed for divorce just over a year after they had gotten married, in April of 1984, and Doug decided not to contest it. According to Doug's sister, Susan, this marriage was definitely not long for this world.
So then, I guess he met Charlotte in a bar, and again, Dougie was shy with his look. Very good-looking guy. I'm sure she latched right onto him. I don't know. I wasn't there. Got pregnant. They got married. I have pictures of their wedding. I guess her family was well off. They owned a realty or something up there in Alaska. And, they knew more people than Dougie did. Dougie had his little close friend. And I hadn't heard from him. I was off busy with my friends. And I mean, now if we had cell phones and we could text, I'm sure we would talk all the time, but it wasn't like that back then. So yeah. I would just ask Mom how he was, but I was busy with my life. He was busy with his life. Everybody was busy. Phone calls were expensive. So then, I guess he told my mom he was leaving Charlotte because he kept catching her. I guess there was a trailer they lived in. The mother bought the trailer, and he would come home and find Charlotte in bed with other men, I guess. I don't think at the same time, but, he'd come home, she'd be in bed with one. And so he left.
During the process of divorcing his ex-wife, Doug would file for sole custody of their son, Robert. However, due to many continuances over the next several months, the court case came together rather slowly. It wasn't until the summer of 1985 that the case began to come to a head, with it being overseen by Palmer's Superior Court Judge Beverly Cutler. As reported by the Anchorage Daily Times, both parents argued that they were the better parent for Robert and presented witnesses in their defense. For her argument, Charlotte claimed that Doug was a frequent drug user, claiming that he not only smoked weed, which he did admittedly, but that he also regularly used cocaine and even sold marijuana. As you would expect, Doug refuted these claims, but did admit that he smoked weed regularly, just never in front of his son. Because it was decriminalized at the time, it was hard for the judge to look down on him for this behavior. And since Charlotte had no evidence to present that Doug either used cocaine or sold marijuana, those claims were largely dismissed. In the end, it was Doug who won primary custody, with Judge Cutler handing down the decision on June 27, 1985. And, as reported by Deborah McKinney of the Anchorage Daily News, Charlotte's visitation was limited to 48 hours every other week, plus 4 hours on her son's birthday, with the alternating Christmas Eves and Christmas Days until the boy turned 8. As time passed, the decision stated, visitation could be increased if determined to be in the best interest of the child. Both parents were ordered to take parenting classes. Martin Dooley, a close friend of Doug's, later told reporters with the Anchorage Daily Times, the day he got custody of Robert, he wouldn't let anybody else talk. He was so excited. I drove him back from Palmer, and that's all he talked about. That's all he had been worried about. Despite winning custody of his son in June of 1985, Doug's life was veering toward an irreversible change in the weeks to come. On Thursday, July 18th, 1985, Doug was working at a construction site in Eagle River, a suburb of Anchorage, just a dozen or so miles north of the city itself. He was part of a crew that was building a pizza place near the Cars supermarket just off of the on-ramp to Eagle River. At the time, he was working for Anchorage Tank and Welding. Doug was unloading steel from a truck alongside another coworker, Thomas Michaels, guiding a steel girder off of the truck when a crane lifting the girders hit an electrical transmission line above. The power shut off immediately, causing an outage for approximately 20 minutes, affecting about 5,000 customers in the vicinity. But Doug and Thomas were still holding onto the steel girder when the crane hit the electrical line. As a result, electricity from the line surged down the cable and into them, according to Fire Inspector Richard Benavides, causing Doug and Thomas Michaels to receive significant third-degree burns. The operator of the crane was not injured because the vehicle itself was grounded, but the two workers on the ground were sent off to be treated at Providence Hospital, in particular to the thermal unit. Without getting into too much detail, basically, Doug's feet had exploded due to the surge of heat and electricity that coursed through his body, and his fingerprints had also been severely burned, with his fingertips being etched onto the metal beam he'd been holding at the time. In a single instant, Doug's entire life, the way he walked, the way he got around, the way he drove his car, the way he held things, the way he scratched an itch, had changed irreversibly. Following this accident, Doug's life would change dramatically. The bottom of his legs were amputated just below the knee, and he had to have all of his fingertips treated for significant burns. However, in the weeks to come, he would refuse to leave the state of Alaska, which he now called home, with his brother Donald telling reporters with the Anchorage Daily Times. Doug loved Alaska so much, he never wanted to leave. Even after his accident, he wanted to stay there. In the months to come, 25-year-old Doug Cleaves would begin to adapt to his new life. Not only as a single father living along the 8900 block of Forest Village Drive in Anchorage, in the Sand Lake duplex, but as someone who was handicapped, who no longer had the use of his legs and had to give his fingers time to heal. Surprising almost no one in his life, though, Doug refused to let the accident define him. As he had done with almost everything in his life, Doug gritted his teeth and put in the work to make his reality better. When he could, he tried to use humor and hard work to speed up his recovery, and nurses seemed to marvel at his good spirits during those early days, when most people were struggling to come to grips with what they had lost. That being said, life was not without its difficulties, especially when it came to being the father of a 2-year-old. With a child quickly approaching that age myself, I can only imagine how difficult it must have been for Doug following his accident. Registered nurse Laura Murray later told Deborah McKinney of the Anchorage Daily News, "He was difficult to work with because he wanted to move forward so quickly. And he was angry, which is just a normal part of that sort of horrific, life-changing injury. His life changed in split seconds, so dramatically. Of course he was angry. He was grieving the loss of his limbs, the loss of a lifestyle. Nurses get that. We totally expect that and respect the process." To make matters even worse, Doug's ex-wife Charlotte filed for custody of 2-year-old Robert the day after Doug's accident on July 19th, which was before doctors had even made the decision to amputate his feet. That motion was denied in August, but would later be appealed to the Alaska Supreme Court in September. Later in that month, September, Doug was finally discharged from the hospital and began settling into his new life at the Sand Lake duplex in South Anchorage. His 22-year-old sister, Susan, would come up and visit, the first of what was intended to be many trips by Doug's family members to come and help out however they could. There, Susan would have to witness Doug go through many repeated difficulties, not only adapting to life with the loss of his limbs and the phantom limb pain that accompanied it, but having to try and keep custody of his son, which he had fought so hard for in the preceding years.
They were battling it out over the baby, and Dougie won. So I guess that really enraged her. And then when I went up there to take care of him because he couldn't walk yet, I had quit my job down here. I was working for American Herc. And my parents said, "Would you go up there and take care of him?" And I said, "Sure." And we were gonna rotate. It was gonna be me first, then it was gonna be my one sister-in-law who was pregnant, and then it was going to be my other sister-in-law because my brothers were.
During this trip, though, Susan began to realize that Doug was going to make it through his recovery and quickly adapt to his new life, if only for one reason: to be there for his son, Robert.
My brother loved him so much. When I was up there taking care of my brother and he came out of the hospital, we moved him into that house on, I forget the name of the road, but I have it somewhere. And it was, a house that was split in half. A girl lived on the other side. We lived in one side. And Dougie, wouldn't let me do anything for the baby. He did everything. And you got to remember, my brother was in a lot of pain. He had just lost his legs. He was going to the hospital for rehab, trying to learn how to walk on prostheses, but he didn't have them yet. And he was just in a lot of pain. I mean, his fingertips were burned from taking all that electricity in his body. But he still insisted on taking care of that baby, cooking for him, bathing him, everything. Everything. I would just sit back and I was just there if he needed me. Dougie did everything with that kid. The love that he had for that baby radiated off him. He loved his son. He was the most important thing in Dougie's life. There was, he didn't care about anybody else. He just cared about that baby. And he was one of the best fathers I have ever seen with a child. Usually when they're little, sometimes the guy's like, no, I'm not changing the diaper. No, I'm not doing that. And I mean, Dougie was wonderful with it. I might have changed one diaper when I was there, honestly, if Dougie was busy doing something. But he did everything for that baby. Everything.
Now, we're going to pause for just a moment to hear a word from today's sponsors. After coming home from the hospital in September of 1985, Doug quickly began to adapt to his new life. He moved into a home at 8962 Forest Village Drive, a duplex just off of West 88th Avenue that was surrounded by similar homes and duplexes. On Saturday, October 19th, 1985, Doug was enjoying some downtime with his sister, Susan, who had come up to visit. Also there were two of Doug's friends, who were also women. One was Doug's girlfriend, who worked as a dancer at the Great Alaskan Bush Company, a gentleman's club in Anchorage. The other was a friend who lived nearby and had helped watch Robert in the past. That weekend, Robert was away at his mother Charlotte's house. That evening, Doug and the women enjoyed a dinner of crab legs, and then started relaxing and watching Fame. But just after midnight, there were a couple of loud knocks at the front door. Susan got up to get it, and cracked open the door to discover a masked figure standing outside. Someone wearing a balaclava, gloves, and a trench coat, holding what looked like a bolt-action hunting rifle. She attempted to close the door quickly, but the figure had inserted the barrel of the gun between the door and the frame before she could do so.
I still remember looking at Dougie and, when we heard the knock at 20 after 12, I looked at him and I was like, who the hell is knocking on the door at 20 after 12? And I looked at him and he nodded, go ahead and open it. And that's when I didn't know if this was somebody playing a joke on us or something, the way the guy was dressed with the ski mask and the trench coat and the gloves. And I was like, if this isn't a joke, in a split second, I'm like, I don't know if this is a joke or not. And I looked over and there was a party next door, so everybody was looking at us out the window. I mean, they could see everything that was going on. And I tried to slam the door shut, and he put the gun barrel down in between the door and the door jamb and then flung me back against the wall. And I was stunned. And I mean, within seconds, he did the first shot that missed my brother. And then I saw a red mark on my brother's forehead, and then I saw his eye come out of his head, and he just fell forward. And yeah, it just happened that quick. And then I guess he shot him a few more times. I don't remember because I was just in shock. So
The masked gunman barreled into Doug's home, past Susan, who was knocked backwards. After entering, the gunman seemed to make a beeline for Doug, who was laying on a pillow on the ground, without his legs, unable to run or fight back in any way. Doug's two friends, who were laying on the ground near him, attempted to clear out of the way, screaming as they did so. News articles report that one was unable to get out of the way, with an errant bullet grazing them as the gunman shot and missed at Doug. Another news article claims that this bullet went through a nearby wall, nearly hitting a woman on the other side. However, I've been unable to verify either claim. At this point, Doug attempted to plead with the shooter from the ground, telling them, "Hey, don't shoot. I understand what's going on. Don't shoot. We can work this out." Sadly though, these would prove to be his last words. Doug was shot a total of 5 times, 3 times in the head and twice in the chest, and was killed instantly. Afterward, the masked gunman turned and fled through the same door he had entered, disappearing into the night.
And then one of the girls screamed, "Sue, close the door," but I don't even remember that. You know what I mean? It was just, I don't remember that. And then we all ran in the back room, and they ran in the closet, and I called 911. And then I walked down the hallway because the police said, "Go ahead and answer the door." And I remember looking at myself in the bathroom mirror, and I was like completely white. And then I ran back to the phone, and I said, "You better tell them to let me know that it's them," because of course, you know, I'm thinking I open the door and the guy's going to murder me next. And, you know, because they pounded on the door hard like he did. And I opened the door and I had all these guns pointed at my head. And I couldn't look over at my brother because Dougie was very, very shy with his looks. He's a very big, good-looking guy. In his teenage years, he was very shy with his looks. He always had girls after him, but he was too shy or embarrassed. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how to explain it. You know, guys like that where they don't realize how good-looking they are. Yeah. And I just felt like he would be embarrassed if I looked over at him and saw him shot. I didn't know whether he was still alive or not. I remember being in the police car and I said to the detective, "Is he dead?" And he said, "Yeah."
The investigation into the murder of Douglas Cleaves was headed by the Anchorage Police Department, who responded to the crime scene at approximately 12:22 on the morning of October 19th, 1985. During interviews with Susan and the other 2 women that had been present, as well as reports from neighbors that had heard the gunshots and looked towards Doug's apartment at the time, investigators gathered that the gunman had approached the duplex wearing a ski mask and a tan-colored trench coat, along with combat gloves. They had carried a high-powered hunting rifle which shot large-caliber rounds, but investigators never publicly released the specific make and model they were carrying. In most of the early reporting, the gunman was reported as being rather thin and standing somewhere between 5'6" and 5 feet 8 inches tall, which would make them on the smaller side for a male shooter. For that reason, the gender of the shooter has always been questioned, and investigators have never definitively stated whether or not they were looking for a male or a female shooter. Witnesses near the crime scene told police about a vehicle seen leaving the area at that time, including a description of the vehicle and a license plate number. But investigators claimed that the vehicle was just someone unconnected to the incident that had been coincidentally driving through the area. Weeks after the shooting, in October of 1985, Crime Stoppers would offer up a $10,000 reward in the hopes that it would compel someone to step forward and hopefully lead to closure for the case. Later, that reward would be increased to $25,000. However, that same month saw a rash of shootings throughout the area, with Anchorage itself reporting at least 6 firearm-related offenses in October of 1985. For that reason, Doug's heinous murder was somewhat drowned out by the other news in the region and was quickly placed on the back burner of public consciousness. One of the main theories in this case is that Doug died as a result of some kind of drug connection he had had. If you look up this case on the very few message board threads that have discussed it, you'll see this theory come up at least once or twice, and seems to have been born out of allegations made by Doug's ex, Charlotte Palmer, during their custody proceedings, when she alleged that he was regularly using cocaine and selling marijuana. However, to put it bluntly, I have found zero evidence to support this claim. In fact, the only evidence that Doug was involved in the world of drug dealing were these allegations made by his ex, during a legal proceeding in which she had nothing to lose and everything to gain. While Doug admittedly liked to smoke marijuana, there is no indication that he was a drug user or dealer in any other capacity. Sadly though, this idea that a murder victim was involved in drug dealing is something that affects a lot of unsolved criminal cases, so this isn't a problem specific to Douglas Cleaves. But it is a worrying trend that I feel dilutes a lot of unsolved cases, as it seems to give society an out to ignore the issue and not press any harder. But in this specific case, I really feel like pushing back on it, because the argument itself is usually pretty hollow, and seems to just boil down to this person likely used or sold illegal narcotics, so they likely got what was coming to them. While research on this subject isn't foolproof, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimates that roughly 13% of the US population has used an illicit drug in the past month. That's nearly 1 out of every 7 people above the age of 12 who has admittedly used an illegal substance within the past 30 days. Sadly though, many of the people who do use these substances are at risk in some way or another, whether it be through their lifestyle, their personal connections, etc. As a result, these people are often at the highest risk of physical violence by someone they know, or are simply more vulnerable to it. This isn't an issue that pertains to Doug's story, I know. In fact, I do apologize for ranting about this during an episode in which it's not particularly useful, but I just hate that quote-unquote drugs has kind of become a catch-all to explain why someone was murdered. And in this case, even if Doug had sold marijuana on the side, assuming that everything his ex-wife said during a custody proceeding, which a judge found no evidence of, was true, him getting murdered still doesn't really make sense. Even though public perception would have you believe that every drug dealer is just an inherently violent criminal, this seems to be something born out of the decades-long war on drugs, and not something that happens all that often in real life. Most drug dealers are in it for the same reason that anyone pursues a profession, to make money. While there are definitely criminal factions that war with each other over drugs and money, sometimes a lot of it, the idea that Doug, even if he were a small-time dealer, was going to be killed by a competitor just seems rather silly to me. He had been laid up in a hospital for months, recovering from getting his legs amputated below the knee at his day job, and his death would have served no purpose. If he owed a drug debt of some kind, wouldn't it have made more sense to get that money back before killing him? And if his death was used to send a message to other potential drug dealers in the area, why had the gunman chosen that particular night to kill him, leaving behind 3 witnesses alive and unharmed? To me, this just shows the flaw in assuming that anyone who was killed violently, and for seemingly no reason, is involved in the world of drugs. That being said, it is definitely possible that money may have played some kind of motive in Doug's death. Another one of the main theories in this case pertains to Doug's money, or at least money that he had coming to him. If you recall, just a few months before his death, Doug had been in a serious accident resulting in the loss of his legs and significant damage to his fingertips. This accident happened on a work site, and as a result, Doug was going to get paid out pretty significantly. When speaking to his sister Susan, I learned that Doug was already making plans for this money, hoping to start his own air taxi company in Alaska, which he'd even be able to operate after his injury. This would give him and his son something adventurous to do together, and Doug hoped that he'd one day get the chance to hand over the company and its assets to Robert. Sadly, he never got that chance. But with that in mind, in almost every murder, we have to look at people who would have something to gain. In Doug's case, we don't really have to look that far. In the months before his murder, Doug had been in a heated custody battle with his ex-wife, Charlotte, over their son, Robert. As you've heard, Charlotte accused Doug of being a drug dealer and claimed that she had the best interest of Robert at heart. Her claims were later rejected by a judge in Alaska's Superior Court who sided with Doug. She had filed numerous appeals in an attempt to overturn the verdict, and then had those appeals rejected, including after Doug's injury. In the aftermath of this workplace accident, Doug stood to gain a lot of money. Money that was passed to his son, Robert, in the wake of his murder. After Doug's murder, custody then defaulted to the only remaining parent, Charlotte.
She was sending fake doctors into the hospital to get reports on them. I have paperwork where she was trying to get the life insurance policy after he died. I have paperwork where she was, stuff this woman did. She was sending doctors into the hospital because she was trying to get custody of the baby, saying he couldn't take care of the baby. I mean, they piled on him. Her and her mother were relentless. They were horrible what they did to him. I could see if he wasn't a good father, but he was a good father. You know what I mean? Nothing in life is perfect, and if you break up, you break up, but at least if the one parent that has custody is a good person, you think, well, thank God for that at least, you know? They're putting the child's interest first, and he did. He didn't say cruel things about her. He would say the facts. He couldn't believe what was happening. It was a nightmare. I even have the one paper in here where he tried to get a restraining order against her, and it was right before he died, and the judge denied it because I guess she thought, it's just the two of them bickering and nothing would happen, but joke was on us, right?
During our conversation, Doug's sister Susan told me that her interest in the case has waned over the years, with her involvement starting and stopping numerous times. Not because she's disinterested in obtaining justice for her murdered brother, mind you, but because it's just too heartbreaking for her to pursue it regularly. Even though this sense of guilt is misplaced in my opinion, Susan feels responsible for opening the door to Doug's killer, even though she had no idea what awaited her on the other side. She feels the effect of that decision every day.
I still have a problem opening doors. If somebody knocks on the door, I just freeze. I can't handle it because I'm the one that opened the door that night. So
in the years since, Susan has spoken to some of the officers and investigators that worked the case to learn more about the current status of the investigation, despite Anchorage PD remaining pretty tight-lipped about it. They usually make it a point not to comment on most open or unsolved cases, so this isn't unusual. However, during one of these conversations, Susan did learn about a potential person of interest, who she believes may have played some part in Doug's murder. A man named Michael Haygood, who lived in the area at the time of the killing. Sadly, I was not able to learn much about him, because he died nearly a decade ago in a very violent and tragic fashion. Early on the morning of Thursday, October 17th, 2013, 40-year-old Nita Kalapsik called Anchorage PD, letting them know that her boyfriend, 49-year-old Michael Haygood, was holding her at gunpoint against her will. The two were at a plot of land Haygood owned in Chugiak, a small town approximately 20 miles north of Anchorage, which was peppered with equipment and vehicles Haygood had collected over the years, including a retrofitted people mover bus where Haygood regularly stayed on the weekends. This phone call to 911 took place just after 4 a.m., and Nita was on the line for approximately 6 minutes, during which time the phone repeatedly passed between her and Michael Haygood, who was drunk and holding a gun to his girlfriend. Eventually, the line disconnected, either accidentally or on purpose. Police arrived at the property approximately 7 minutes after the call began, at 4:10 a.m., But approximately 1 minute before officers began approaching, they heard 2 gunshots come from the direction of the bus. When they made it there moments later, they discovered 2 bodies. Michael Haygood had killed his girlfriend, Nita Klapsik, before turning the gun on himself. This is sadly where the story just kind of ends. Police never publicly revealed many details of the event, such as what kind of gun Haygood had used or what had preceded this event. So all we know is that Haygood killed his girlfriend before killing himself. The only thing that I can think of is that the date in which this took place, October 17th, was just a day or so shy of the 28th anniversary of Douglas Cleaves' murder. And normally I would find this to be a total coincidence, but during Susan's conversations with officers and investigators working on her brother's case, she learned about a potential link to Michael Haygood. Maybe this was a throwaway line of inquiry opened up by investigators at some point in time, but in the future, I would love to learn more about any possible connections between Michael Haygood and Douglas Cleaves. Whether they knew each other, had any shared interest or connections, whether they ran in the same social circle, anything. Really, if you know anything, please reach out. We're going to pause again to hear more from the sponsors that made today's episode possible. Sadly, after the death of Douglas Cleaves, his son Robert defaulted into the care of his mother, Charlotte, who almost immediately took him and left the state with her new boyfriend. Shortly thereafter, the two married, and Robert's last name was changed to his stepfather's. His mother and stepfather would end up having 2 children together, giving Robert a half-brother and half-sister, but sadly, his sister died in a car accident. After leaving Alaska, Susan and other members of Doug's family, including his parents, Robert's grandparents, never thought they would get the chance to see or hear from him again. But a handful of years ago, Susan started looking him up on Facebook and finally reconnected with her long-lost nephew.
He knew something was different because he has a half-brother and half-sister. Now, the half-sister, she died in that accident. His half-brother is nowhere near as big as him, and he said that he grew up saying, why am I so big? And nobody else in the family is, and I guess he said he always fought, his mother always treated him like shit. He said she always treated him like shit. She always had an attitude about him. He's kind of, to me, from what he said, it was like a please, mommy, please love me type of thing. Now, don't forget, she got him when he was 2.5, okay? She molded that child. She made that child what he is. She took him from my brother, who would have given him stability. My brother was to get a lot of money in his case for losing his legs. He had planned on opening up some sort of airplane thing and hoping to make it bigger and bigger, but that was his dreams. That's what he would think about. That's what I'm going to do. And I mean, the kid would have had a great life in Alaska. And when I got a hold of Robert, he said that he was told that my brother was a drug addict and he did drug deals all the time, and that's why he was murdered by bad people. That's what his grandmother told him. And I said, Robert, your father loved to smoke pot. He didn't do it around you. He wasn't a pothead. He just enjoyed smoking pot now and then. And I said, he was never a drug addict. And I said, he loved you more than anything, and you were going to have a great life. I mean, I don't know what to say to you. I'm not going to lie to you. And he said he was just told all this rotten stuff his mother used to say to him, you're just like your father. You're just like your father. And I said, that would be a compliment, Robert. I said, I don't know why she would be so horrible. I mean, she got what she wanted. She took him and raised him. He had money because of my brother's murder. And all she did was just be horrible to that kid. Just horrible to him. He said he had a horrible life growing up because she was always so mean to him. And I said to him, well, you look exactly like your father. And I know I said something to him when I was talking to him. I said, you have no idea the pain my mother went through. I said, yes, I went through pain. I saw it. I opened the door. But I said, for a mother to lose her son, murdered like a dog on the floor, he couldn't even get up. He didn't even have his legs. He was resting on pillows. There was no way for him to defend himself, which is why immediately, he was trying to reason with the guy and, hey, let's work this out. You don't have to do this. He was calm as anything. He wasn't even nervous. And, I'm sorry. I go in and out of different things when I think about it and I talk about it. But she, for her to do this and to raise the child and do everything she did and to raise him and just, I thought he seemed like a decent kid when I talked to him. I would talk to him about his dad all the time, tell him stories. I made copies of every single picture. I sent him a couple things that were my brother's. I sent him his birth certificate because she had his name changed immediately when she moved to Florida with her boyfriend. And I just wanted him to know his dad. And I said, he wasn't perfect. He did stupid things when he was a kid growing up. I remember him and my other two brothers getting in a fight because Dougie went and stole some money from them to go buy pot because he didn't have any money. And it's not like he grew up to rob banks or anything. He just did a stupid boy move, and the three of them got in a hell of a fight with each other. And it was like mastodons fighting. You know what I mean? Because, like I said, we're big people. Dougie was 6'4", and my other two brothers are 6'1". We're not skinny. We are big people. And So then I would get to talk to Robert. He would call me all the time. He called me up. I guess his mother really raised him because he put his gun in she was still his wife. She wanted to leave him. They had 3 kids. She said she wanted to leave him. He told her she wasn't going anywhere, got the gun, put it in her throat, told her she wasn't leaving. Then he let her go. She pressed charges. I was like, Robert, why would you put a gun in somebody's mouth? Haven't you learned? How the hell were you raised where you think this is even normal? So Robert got a divorce from his wife. I talked to his wife a little bit on the internet, but then I guess when she left him, that was it. So he would still talk to me, and he would text me all the time. And I'd say to him, Robert, you got to learn from your mistakes and do good, okay? You screwed up. Your wife's gone. You're dying of pain. Now it's time to focus on your kids, raise your kids, and just, you have to do that. You have to just put your feelings aside like your father did and raise your children. Help your wife raise your children, and don't speak bad about your wife in front of your children. And then he started going out with a girl he knew, and then she got my number and called me up, and she said, I just want you to know he's not who he says he is. He just beat me up, blah, blah, blah. But then she went back to him like 3 times, and I said to her, that's not normal. I said, you never stay with somebody who lays a hand on you, ever. I said, I don't care. I said, I'm sorry he's like that. I thought it was a freak thing that he did with his wife when he flipped out that she was going to leave him. And she said, no, he's been beating me up. He's beating me up in front of the kids. And I said, she goes, but I love him. I said, that's not love, honey. I said, you got to get out of there. So then after they took him and they threw him in jail, and she was still living at his house. And I guess his parents were trying to kick her out of the house because they wanted to rent it out. Swear to God, these people. And I guess they went to court, and then I guess his kids were being nasty to her because they're close with Charlotte and her husband. And she was telling me all this stuff. I mean, just telling me all this stuff about Robert and everything. And I said, Jesus, I had no idea he was a drug addict. I guess he was a real drug addict. He blew through his $200,000 or whatever it is on drugs. He bought a house. He bought a truck. I mean, he's got no money left from what he told me. And just, I don't know. After they put him in prison, I think I sent him $20 once for the, what's it called, where you put in their bank account in prison if they want to buy snacks. Yeah. And I just said to my husband, I can't do this. I'm disgusted that my brother's son turned into this. And I did what I said I was going to do, and I was going to let him know how much his dad loved him, because I'm sure he was never told anything good about his dad, which was true. And I just want to let him know that he did come from a nice family, and he did have a good father, and he would have had a good life. And, you know, I'm sorry he didn't have that. But then when I found out, you know, he was doing drugs and he had lost his job, and I said to my husband, I can't do this. I have a nice life. I have a great husband. I got a great daughter. I'm not going to be dragged down into this. I can't. I can't do it. So I stopped talking to him, and he's still in prison from what I know. I guess he's got a few more years. And I really, when he gets out, I really don't even want to talk to him. I just don't want it. I want to remember my brother the way he was, and I don't want to remember that this crazy woman he married took the child and just totally destroyed his life.
To this day, Susan continues to push for her brother to be remembered, not just as a murder victim, but as someone who had lived an entire life before that. Someone who was charming and funny and kind and adventurous, and someone who loved his son more than anything.
The thing that really stands out again was his love for his son. I mean, which was his older years. That's what really sticks with me. That's Dougie. The love he had for the kid is the love that he had inside him, and he was a good guy. He was somebody you would want to be friends with. He was somebody you would want to hang around with. He was fun. Like I said, he tried to find, no matter what happened, he tried to find the best thing from it. His glass was always half full. He never was like, oh me, I lost my legs. He was never. That's Dougie. Just, I mean, if I went to him with a problem when he lost his legs and he was in pain, he would focus on me and not his pain. You know what I mean? That's him. We would get in our sister-brother fights, but that, again, I was the brat there. It wasn't him. I was the bratty little sister that didn't want my older brother hanging around, but nothing serious. Just, he was a good person. I don't know what else to say. He was not nasty. He was not vindictive. He did not go out of his way to be mean or cruel or trash somebody or hurt somebody. He tried to do the best at everything he could, and just, that baby was his whole world. Dougie was just a kind person. He loved talking to people. You know, anywhere you went, he knew somebody somewhere. He stood out. He was a big, tall, good-looking, fun guy. He loved to laugh. He, you know, he'd do anything for you if he could help you. My friends all loved him. You know, my girlfriends thought he was wonderful. Again, you know, it was me going, no, get away, you know, you're my friends, leave us alone, we're going to do this. But again, he wanted to hang with us to protect us. He was just a nice guy. He was he was just a nice guy, and I have severe guilt about being the one to open the door, and I just feel bad. I always say to my husband, my God, you would have loved my brother, you know. He was just fun, always laughing, joking around. He loved to joke around. He would see the humor in things. I remember we got the mail one day when we were up there, and it was for a podiatrist, and he was like, yeah, right. How'd they get my name? And he just, you know, because he had no more feet, and he would find the humor in any situation, but he was serious at the same time and got done what had to get done. You know what I mean? Like, again, with the baby, he was very, very mature. That was his thing, is taking care of his son. So, and he wasn't nasty. Like, when Charlotte would come to pick up the baby, he did not get nasty. He didn't poke the bear with her. Why didn't somebody horrible get murdered instead of him? How could this possibly have happened in the first place? And how could they have gotten away with it?
In June of 1989, Anchorage homicide investigator Joe Austin told reporters with the Anchorage Daily Times that police had a good idea of who killed Doug Cleaves, but didn't have enough evidence to press charges at that time. Decades later, things seemed to be mostly unchanged, with Doug's case remaining a footnote in multiple articles regarding unsolved homicides in Alaska, but creating very few headlines in the process. Anyone with information in this case is encouraged to call Anchorage PD at 907-786-8900. If desired, you can remain anonymous and also make yourself eligible for the cash reward by contacting Crime Stoppers at 907-561-STOP. If you would like to chat with me about Doug or this case, you can also reach out to me personally at michael@unresolved.me. That's MICHEAL at unresolved.me, or through the Unresolved phone line at 831-200-3550. Until such a time, the story of Douglas Cleaves will remain unresolved.